Leg grab throwing techniques may be banned in international judo competition, but it doesn't mean they're not effective techniques. And in today's episode, I want to take a look at leg grabs. Hi everybody, I'm Steve Scott and welcome to another episode of Freestyle Judo. Well, today I want to look at leg grabs, the now banned techniques that you see in the IJF, but we still use them in other sets of contest rules and certainly in other grappling and fighting sports. So they're certainly a viable and effective way of throwing someone. They're also great for taking someone down with less control in a throw, and certainly great for transitioning from standing to the ground. So leg grabs certainly have their purpose, and I think it's a disservice if judo people quit doing them. It's shameful, because they're definitely part of judo. They're definitely part of any combat sport, certainly part of Sambo. And we're going to take a look at basically three different leg grab type techniques today. There are so many, but we're going to take a look keen on three of them. But before that, I'm fascinated with history. I'm one of those history buffs, and I'm a geek on it on a variety of levels, but certainly in the history of martial arts, and specifically about the history of judo, which I think has a rich and interesting history. And it's through shows like this and other formats and other media that history of judo and the martial arts is kept alive, and an accurate history. So I want to look at today at a kind of an interesting point to me, the early history of Kodokan Judo, of when Jigoro Kano was a young man, was just starting out on his career, which would literally change the world. So let's start with that right off. And actually, I got that in the form of a question recently, and it prompted me to say, well, let's just do kind of part of a show about this. And the question was, can you tell me some more about the history of judo? It's a pretty basic, generic question, which is a great question. So let's take off on that. But right now, let's talk about specifics of the early years of judo. Later will come the mid-years and later years of the development, when it became an international activity, that type of thing. But right now, let's focus in on the early years of approximately the early 1880s up through maybe the turn of the century, okay? And those were really formative years. Just like any growth of any organization or any structure or any movement, the early years really do dictate what happens later on in that movement, that organization's history. It sets the tone, and it certainly did in Kano's case. As you know, Professor Jigoro Kano went on to be the Minister of Education in Japan. He was actually elected to, I believe, the House of Peers in Japan. So he was a very influential individual, and I certainly believe, after reading a lot about Kano, that had he lived, he died in 1938. Had he lived, he was one of the sane voices to avert war in that period of time. So it's a shame he didn't, because he really was one of those sane, calm voices. So he was a great man on many levels. And when he was a young man, he was born in 1860 in an area near Tokyo, in Mikage. It's now, I think, absorbed into the city of Tokyo. I'm not sure, but that's what I've read. And he was not a well-to-do family, but the family was in the sake business, as I recall. And so he had the money to go to, and he had the opportunity to go to and study school at the good universities. And when he was a young man, probably, in 1882 was his first teaching assignment. That was also the time when he started the Kodokan, in the Kodokan Judo. But prior to that, as a young man, and I believe he started the study of Jiu-Jitsu about 1877, and he studied different forms of Jiu-Jitsu, which maybe we'll get into in a different show, but he basically focused on Jiu-Jitsu as self-defense, because he was a slight-built man, and he wanted to learn how to fight. He was tired of being bullied, just like probably everybody else who takes up judo. That's one of the big reasons I took up judo as a kid, so it's universal, even with the guy who started the whole thing. But then, as he developed his skills in Kito-ryu and Tenshin Shinryu, primarily those two forms, I think some other forms, Jiu-Jitsu as well, he was very innovative. He was a very independent-minded guy. He wanted to branch out on his own a bit, and with the blessings of his instructors, I might add. He didn't break from them completely. It was with their blessings that he moved on to other things that he did in life, which formed the Kodokan. So that's a little bit of background about him as a person. And he was, in 1882, like I said, he started his first school, the Kano Academy, the Kano Juku. And that was in February of 1882, and he started this at the Eisho Temple, the Eishoji. And he had a small dojo area of 9 tatami size areas, so it was a small, area there. And that was, he called that his dojo, the Kodokan. It was in February of 1882. So he basically, at the Kano Juku, the Kano Academy, he had an extra area there where he could teach his Jiu-Jitsu, which was primarily at that time Kito-ryu. So that's the initial start of the Kodokan. So it really didn't start as a full-blown movement, as it were. It started actually as the name of a club. And then later, on June 5th in 1882, he formally declared, I'm going to start Kodokan Judo. And Kodokan means school to learn the way, just the philosophy. And so it was in June that he actually formally launched Kodokan Judo. That was an interesting period of his life, because later on, just a year later, he would be, let me look at my notes here, I just want to make sure they're accurate. He would go on in 1883 to get a formal teaching license in Kito-ryu Jiu-Jitsu, I believe. So let me see here, make sure that we have that correct. Yes, that is correct. Okay. And it was in October of 1883, you might add. So he was in his teacher was at Tsunetoshi Kubo, was his sensei that awarded him that menkyo, that license to teach. I'm getting ahead of myself. So in June 5th, 1882, he started the Kodokan. The first student to enroll in the Kodokan was, you'll hear about him in a few minutes here, Tsunejiro Tomita was the first person to enroll at the Kodokan. Okay, he was the very first person. Tomita was his name. By the way, the first woman to enroll at the Kodokan was also in 1883, or the next year in 1883, and her name was Sueko Ashiya. Pardon me if my Japanese pronunciation is not that good, but that was the first woman to. So it was women were involved in judo right from the early days as well. So I think that's an important thing, because judo has led the way in many ways for the development of women's sports and physical education. So right from the start, Kano was part of it. But anyway, so in June he starts the Kodokan, and from there on it expands through the years. It expanded ever larger as he gained in reputation, as students gained in reputation, as skill, and his methodology in teaching was very pragmatic. So he gained a good reputation, but he also gained sponsorships. He was not a stupid man by any means. He was very, very good in gaining sponsors, and a lot of it, though, was out of his own pocket right from the start. Like, every coach can relate to this, can't we? So he spent a good deal of his own money in those early years of the Kodokan. So anyway, let's go on here. By the way, as a side note, when talking about women's judo, it was in 1933, and I jumped way ahead, it's just as a side note here, that the first woman to be promoted to Shodan, first grade, black belt, was Katsuko Kosaki in 1933. The Kodokan issued her a Shodan. So that was the first woman to get a black belt in judo. Again, early days of the Kodokan. Cool stuff, I think. Okay, so in 1884, Kano really developed, he formalized the rank system. But prior to that, he saw there was a need, because he was an educator, he was a teacher. He saw where people needed to progress from one level of learning to the other. So he formulated the Kyu and Dan system. It wasn't based on the old Menkyo or license system that he had come up under in Jiu-Jitsu, the feudal Jiu-Jitsu. He was the first to launch what we now look at as the Q ranks, or the class ranks, the student ranks, and the Dan grades, or the ranks for the black belts and the more advanced people. So he launched that, and that was actually in 1883. And at that time, that was the first time he awarded black belts, or they weren't even black belts really, they were Shodan, initial grades, to two people. I mentioned it before, Tsunejiro Tomita, and also to Shiro Saigo, who was a well-known at that time as one of their top contestants, one of their top athletes in Kodokan Judo. And all during that time, there was a lot of rivalry with the other jiu-jitsu schools. So Saigo, Tomita, other people like that, they were Kano's lions. You know, those are the ones he set out to compete against other schools to prove their mettle. And they did quite well. They usually won, but sometimes lost. But it was often, these were the people, these were the core guys that Kano could rely on, and others as well. So that was in 1883. That was the first Shodan recognition. Now, they weren't really wearing any colored belts, as it were, at that time, because the next year he started awarding Dan grades and formally, okay? And by 1886, that was in 1884, he started running. In fact, let's go back to 1884. I hate to keep going back and forth. Sorry for that. But the Kodokan ranking system was founded on 3 Q classes, Sankyu, Nikyu, EQ, that, descending or, going up to the order, and then Shodan, Nidan, and Sandan. So 3 Q ranks, 3 Dan grades. And by 1884, that was kind of formalized at that time by Kano. By 1886, the use of the black sash around the kimono to designate the Dan grades came into popular use there at the Kodokan. The belt as we know it now, in effect the judo-gi as we know it now, Kano developed those, Kano designed those, the judo-gi and the belt as we know it now, and that came into use about 1907. So the belt, the thick belt that we wear now, was not worn in the early days of the Kodokan. It was mainly a sash around the waist. And the belt, as we know it now, was used along in 1907 with the formal introduction of the judo-gi. By the way, I might add, let me take a quick break here to tell you that three main references. I get several references I've used, but 3 primary references are Saving Japan's Martial Arts by Christopher Clark, a great book. I would highly recommend it, Saving Japan's Martial Arts. Another one, The Way of Judo by John Stevens. Very good portrait of Kano and his students. Very, very, very good book, I must say. And the one I really like is by Sid Hoare, A History of Judo. And these are 3 references, plus other work by Dreger, Gleason, other people like that as well. But these 3 books were my primary reference sources for what I'm talking about today. And so the information I'm giving you is intermingled from these 3 books primarily, and like I said, a couple others. So anyway, so we're talking about the rank. So in 1884, the Kodokan formalized the rank. But about this time also, about this period of 1883, 1884, Jigoro Kano saw that his students, they were having hard, rough practices. People were getting hurt. And again, this led to the development of the more modernized judo-gi later, where they wouldn't have the rough scrapes on the knees or the elbows, the wrists, or the foreheads with different parts of the body because they were very rough tatami mats. But there was also real hard practice. So he needed to rein his people in, basically. He needed to say, well, they're getting real tough. They're really getting really good. But I need to teach them more. They need to learn more skills. There needs to be more structure in the practice. So he formulated with the idea of kata. He used the kata that had been previously used. He got the idea from kata from the other jiu-jitsu systems, of course, that were primarily used at kata training. But again, he introduced randori, based a lot of what he learned in the Kito-Ryu system of jiu-jitsu. They did a semblance of randori as well. So he liked this. He thought it was real free practice, open practice. So he instituted randori right off the bat for his young students. But then he saw the need for kata, for a structure. So he developed, starting in 1884 up through 1887, the first 6 kata, or first forms of structured training of judo that we know now today. The first one was developed from the years 1884 up through 1886, was the nage no kata, the forms of throwing. And so that, because he wanted to have some basis to teach throwing techniques. He preferred throwing over ground fighting. In fact, he often says 60 to 70% of judo's activity should be nagewaza, throwing techniques, and 30 to 40% should be katamiwaza, or ground fighting, grappling techniques. And he stuck to that. He really believed that. And he got that basically from his study of Kito-ryu Jiu-Jitsu. That was where he was influenced heavily with that. They did a lot of throwing techniques in that system of Jiu-Jitsu. So between the times of 1884 and 1886, he developed the nage no kata. So he had 15, I think it was started with 20, but he down to 10. But he settled on 15 formalized techniques that would be the structure to teach the fundamentals of throwing to his students. During that time also, he was heavily influenced by other jiu-jitsu systems that he needed to up his game in the ground fighting, in the newaza, the katamiwaza, as it were. So between 1884 and 1886, almost simultaneously, but slightly after the nage no kata, he developed the katami no kata, the forms of holding or grappling. Okay, so the ground fighting forms. Again, to give structure so his students wouldn't just be doing throws all the time, they would also have well balanced. And the two kata, nage no kata, katami no kata, he referred to them as the randori no kata, the forms of open-ended, free play, so that you could use nage no kata, katami no kata in the forms of randori. Then later, as he developed more in his own understanding of jiu-jitsu, and his students were progressing, of course, in the year 1887, he was very active technically in developing the juno kata, the forms of gentleness, okay, or forms of adaptability, as it were, the forms of gentleness, and the kime no kata, the forms of decision, okay, of more of a self-defense form. Again, retained a lot. The juno kata retained to a good degree some of the stuff he learned in the earlier systems of jiu-jitsu, and the kime no kata, and another kata, the Kuchiki no kata, he developed in 1887, the forms of antiquity. These were very much carried over from Kito-ryu Jiu-Jitsu, okay, and I think maybe some of Tenshin Shinro Jiu-Jitsu, but that's where he got the ideas from. Another kata he developed was the Itsutsu no kata, the forms of 5, and that was more of an esoteric, very, very difficult to understand, and it was still, he started it and he never really finished it from what I understand in the development of that kata, so it ended up where it is. So if you see it, it's very odd looking. Some people do it still, of course, but it's a very odd looking kata, and it's very esoteric in terms of the theory and technical expertise of judo on a different level. So Kano was a very bright man, so he wanted to reflect in his kata different methods of teaching that he could, again, advance his students. So these early years of the Kodokan were just fascinating to me. I mean, they really are, and it may be boring to you if you're not into this, but the old saying is, you gotta know your history. You gotta know where you came from. Certainly to know where you are now, and to know where you're going. Okay, so it's just fascinating to me. One other point here I just want to bring up, and we talk about contest rules all the time in judo, sambo, jiu-jitsu, no matter what the grappling sport may be. The first set of contest rules were actually written by Kano himself in the year 1890. And that was the first set. So when someone talks about, well, we only use traditional contest rules, okay, which set of traditional contest rules do we use? The very first one in 1890, he altered them in 1899 when there was more active nationally in other systems of jiu-jitsu to formulate to include others, and then they went on from there. Over the years, the contest rules of sport judo have been altered tremendously, starting with the first set of rules written in 1890 by Kano himself. And again, he changed some himself later, and then later on the Kodokan, later on different organizations like the International Judo Federation. But over the years, the contest rules have fluctuated, have never been really fixed to a great degree. Other than we do know this, that in the contest rules, if you throw your opponent hard on his back, primarily on his back with control and force, that is ippon. And that the concept of ippon, the early days called ippon for a full point, body slam, as it were. But they had, like best 2 out of 3 points. They played with those rules quite a bit. So the concept of ippon, as we know it, has always been front and foremost in the idea of throwing someone successfully. But it wasn't made to the point where we use it today as the final, the one event that happens, probably later on in the 20s and 30s when they changed the contest rules to just have one ippon. So that's a little bit of a side there. But I think the early rules, or the early history of Kodokan Judo, and I just touched on it briefly, man, I tell you, like I said, if you get these various books, A History of Judo by Sid Hoare, The Way of Judo by John Stevens, and Saving Japan's Martial Arts by Christopher Clark, in addition to anything you can get your hands on by Jeff Gleason or Don Drager. These people are really great historians, and others too. There are other good books out there as well, but I really recommend these books here. I've used them a lot for reference here on this show, and certainly in my own study of judo. So that is that on the history, the early history of Kodokan Judo. Okay, now I'd like to take a look at leg grabs, leg grab throwing techniques. It was said recently, not real recently, but a few years ago, after the IJF changed the rules quite a bit to where they didn't allow touching the legs for any type of throwing techniques, a judo referee said to a friend of mine, leg grabs are no longer part of judo. They're not even in, you can't even consider them judo anymore. And my friend said, well, that's a pretty myopic way of looking at it. I mean, leg grabs have been part of judo since its inception. And the guy said, well, not anymore. Well, okay, that may be his opinion, but certainly not my opinion. And I think certainly not the opinion of a lot of you watching this as well. So judo has a rich history of grabbing the legs, and that's from Kano's early days of blending different forms of jiu-jitsu and Western style of wrestling, and stealing, not stealing, but borrowing heavily. Hey, so it's okay to steal when it's a good stuff like this. So borrowing heavy, and it really, it gave rise to like Morote Gari. It gave rise to kata Guruma, other throws like that, which are very much part of judo. So if we ignore them now, if we quit teaching them, we're doing judo a disservice in general. As a study of judo, we're also doing our students a disservice. So coaches, please keep teaching leg grabs. If you go to IJF tournaments that don't permit them, those are the rules of the IJF. That's what they want, a certain look to judo. That is their business, and they certainly have a right to do it. They're the governing body internationally for the sport. So if you need to play to their rules, do it. But don't neglect teaching leg grabs. It's so deep a part of judo. We just can't give up on them. And in this show, I want to look at Morote Gari, both hand reap, and how it differs from a wrestler's double leg takedown. We're going to talk about that, and the videos are going to show that. I'm going to have 2 videos on Morote Gari. Okay, one more on the basics of it, and one more on the specifics of it. Then we're going to look at a throw that used to be called generically, because there was no official name for it in the Kodokan, ashidori, leg grab. And it always meant a single leg grab, almost always, but generally it was accepted as single leg grab was an ashidori. Well, that came to be known as, in the last few years, I can't remember what year the Kodokan came out, they renamed it to Kuchiki Daoshi, and it means the dead tree drop, and so that's what it really means, the dropping like a dead tree. And there are variations of that Kuchiki Daoshi that used to be just the ashidori, and there are numbers of them. And so we're going to talk about that. I have 2 videos on basically single leg grabs, which is Kuchiki Daoshi now. Then we're also going to have one video here on the 5th video, I should say. If I said 4, I meant to say 5 videos. We are going to look at te Guruma, the hand wheel. Often called in the early days, my career back in the 60s, it was sometimes called sukui nagi, scooping throw. And it was considered a variant of the sukui nagi, which we didn't cover in today's show, which is also a leg grab technique. But you know, and we didn't cover kata Guruma here today either, which is kind of the fireman's carry, the shoulder wheel, because I wanted to really concentrate on the Morote Gari and the Ashidori, Kuchiki Daoshi, and the Te Guruma. I want to concentrate on those 3 throws with 5 videos. So anyway, we're going to cover the basics, this first video here, of, I was teaching the guys one practice, just the basics of how to do Morote Gari. Now, let me stress this right now. Morote Gari, both hand reaping, okay, is different than a double leg takedown. Morote Gari is a throw. I want to throw him hard, primarily onto his back with control and force. Double leg takedown isn't always that. It isn't always a throw. It could be a throw. You could throw somebody so hard with a double leg takedown that it turns into flat on his back with control and force. It certainly could. Don't get me wrong. But the idea of Morote Gari is different. And I'm going to point out in the video here, but in Judo Morote Gari, we're holding on to each other. In fact, when I wrote the rules of Freestyle Judo, I wanted to include Morote Gari, and so we specifically say the throw has to start with holding on to your opponent, both hands, and you drop low, lower your levels, and sink in and throw them. Okay, it's not a shoot or a hit from a far direction. Okay, you have to make contact first. And Judo's Morote Gari differs from wrestling's double leg takedown in the fact that, 1, you start with a gripping position, and number 2, you start at closer body proximity than you do in a double leg takedown, because you can start from, you may not need any contact at all, and you can shoot very low and catch the legs from very low angle. So there's a difference between Morote Gari and double leg takedown. And if you say, well, that's all hooey, fine. Teach it any way you want to. I'm just telling you the way I teach it, and I think it makes some sense the way I teach it. So here we go. So the first video is about 2.5 minutes long, and it's the basis, or the basics, of Morote Gari. So here we go. Okay, Morote Gari. Morote means both hands, and Gari means to reap something. Okay, to scoop it. And this is a good name for this. A lot of people call this the double leg takedown, but we're going to talk about how it's different than a takedown. Double leg takedown is a great move, but we want to throw them hard. So Morote Gari is a hard throw. All right, and here's the difference. The double leg takedown, I'm gonna be here, and I'm gonna shoot and drop and catch. Okay, I'm gonna shoot, fake, catch him in there. That's great. It's a great move. It really does work. And you can probably do Morote Gari from that outside shot too. But the real difference, at least the way I believe, is when I do Morote Gari, we're gripped up, and we're fairly close in posture here. I've got a good upright posture, and I've been over. Okay, so here's here. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to drop low, lower my level, keep my back totally straight, bend my knees as I lower my level. So if you can see here, it's like this. So when I do this, okay, I'm going to drop with my right foot, and I'm going to do a drop step like they do in wrestling. But in this case, I'm going to go straight down and drop in. So I'm going to down here like this, and I'm going to shoot like this. You see how I'm driving? My back is straight, and my legs are really low, and I'm driving into them. Now when I do this, I hook. I don't like to grab my hands together. Some guys may. If that works for you, do it. I like to, when I do this, you might pop his hands up and catch. I like to just grab like this, just above the knees. I like to grab them, and as I throw them, I want to pull them apart, split them open, and I can drive them straight through. My shoulder is right in the knot of his belt, right in his gut, and my head, my ear, is on his hip. Now some people will use their head to drive straight through, and that's fine if that works for you. I like to get the shoulder in. It's almost like a football tackle. I like to get the shoulder in, get my head in, that way I can steer him with my head too if I want to take him to a side. Okay? So here's the grip, and I'm going to drop low. As I drop, maybe want to pop his hands up, however you do that, it's fine. But drop like this, catch my head, my ear on his hip, and I'm going to scoop him straight in. Okay, and you saw, I wanted to point out that close proximity, gripping first, and shoot, or not shoot, but drop low, lower your levels, nice straight back, use your legs to lower your levels, take a hold of them, and throw. The next video, about 3 minutes long, Derek is going to be explaining some specifics of Morote Gari, some different things that good things, bad things, good way to have a more effective Morote Gari. So this next video, 3 minutes long, specifics of Morote Gari. So here we go. Just a couple of fine points that we want to talk with you about finishing and doing the Morote Gari. So let Derek have the stage here.
So I'm going to do it at first like sideways so you can see what I'm doing with my feet and my hands, and then I'll move back over here so you can see the actual finish. An important thing to remember here is that if you take the drop step or the penetrating step in between his legs, that's great. You can think of it like a lunge, right? Boom. So I drop down low in a lunging position, and I lead with my shoulder. I can keep my back straight, my head goes on the hip, but I have no power out of this leg anymore. All right, so you need to bring the foot forward. Okay, then you have drive again, right? So it doesn't matter if you want to take him down, like straight down, or if you want to lift him up and then throw him down. You need that back leg there to drive. Second thing is your arms come all the way around. So, like Steve said, not everybody really likes to get their hands together, because if you can't, and you need to have your hands together in order to finish it, you're going to get in trouble. If you have just the thighs and you're used to that, great. Okay? You can always go back to gripping the hands, okay? But the point remains, you're hugging them in nice and close, so that when you do bring that back foot forward and you scoop, your shoulder goes down and you just bop the guy right there, okay? So, right in nice and tight, hugging the thighs into your shoulders, and as I bring my legs up, I push my shoulder in and I aim them right there. Okay? You have to stay tight on them. If you just like lift up, being nice, yeah, he'll fall right there, but a lot of times he'll turn out. So when I lift up, I'm just going to turn. Don't keep on this. Okay? There he goes. Okay? And that's because I wasn't tight on him. Okay? So if he tries to do the same thing, I stayed tight on him, and I scooped him, and he went down. Make sense?
All right, so double leg takedown, both leg reap, Morote Gari, both leg reap. Great throw, been in judo from its inception, I believe. So certainly we can't neglect it, so let's keep teaching it. It may not be allowed in the rules of the IJF, but let's keep doing it because it is very much part of judo. By the way, it's a great throw for self-defense. I mean, I don't know how many times people have done a double leg takedown in Morote Gari in a fight when they needed to tackle a guy. In fact, one of my good black belts, TJ Barnett, stopped a robbery by the way, he played football in college, so he did probably a football tackle, but it was a Morote Gari as well, and he stopped this guy from assaulting a woman, I think, in a parking lot of grocery stores. So, hey, this stuff really works. So it does work. So anyway, Morote Gari. Kuchiki Daoshi. Kuchiki is like a dead tree, okay, and Daoshi means to drop, just drop flat. So it's gone by different names in the past. It's never been called anything until recently when the Kodokan reformulated some nomenclature. It's called ashidori, leg grab. It had different names. It had different names. I saw it earlier in my study of Jiu-Jitsu, actually, with Ken Regeneter, this ashidori type thing. But later on, when I was able to travel and I was in Cuba for an international judo tournament, this is back in the 80s, and when leg grabs were still legal, and the Cubans were just tearing everybody up with ashidori, And and I remember seeing that in Sambo, it was used so heavily too, and they were using a Sambo style approach to doing it, where it was a particular way of bending the guy over and grabbing the leg. And so I just started calling it the Cuban leg grab for my guys at Welcome Mat. And for many years, we've been calling it the Cuban leg grab, which is basically a very rough, very good form of ashidori. And you'll see it here when we do the video on Kuchiki Daoshi. Derek's doing it here with Tony in these videos. So the first video on Kuchiki Daoshi is about 4 minutes, and it explains a lot of the basis of it, the basic idea of it, and then some ways of actually doing it. So anyway, let's take a look. 4 minutes, Kuchiki Daoshi. Here we go. I'll just key it off for you. So Derek's going to do it. Now watch when he does this. He's a lefty, so he's sugar footing with his left foot a little bit, and he's got it pretty close to Tony there. See that? So we've got a pretty close proximity right here to start with. Everybody see that? Catch the grip. The left hand is on, if you're righty, be your right hand. The left hand is on this flapping jacket right here that's kind of open and ready, or kind of loose. Okay? And he's leading with his left hip because he will be diving in low. Okay, now turn around so you can see your right hand. The right hand is just here, okay, at the lapel. You can have it anywhere, but he's starting at the lapel, okay? So he's got kind of a back grip and lapel grip, okay? So that's how he's starting. Go ahead, come in, and we'll be talking more good for you. Bam, okay? Now you can also level them and pick them up, but a lot of times we like to go down to the side because I want to get side control. Yes, show off. Okay, let's do the one where you come in and just kind of just level them out just like that. Okay. Okay, see, you can do it. Finish standing. It's a single leg grab is what it is. That's fundamentally it. That's why we always call it ashidori, leg grab, for many years in judo and jiu-jitsu. So, but let's look at how we parse that out now, okay? He's got the grip here. He's got the grip here. Now, when he steps in, he's going to step into the outside and lowers his level with his legs. He doesn't bend over. Do it wrong this time when you bend over at the waist. You don't want to bend over at the waist. You lose all your power and your kinetic energy going in and forward to him. You want to drive him down and throw him hard, okay? So what he does is, he drops in low. Now, let's look at this hand. He's not setting him out. He's going to snap. See how he's driving that elbow down? And that really breaks his balance. Oh, sorry about that. That really breaks his balance. Let's look at this again. When he comes in, watch his elbow. See that? You can't help but throw him when you drive that elbow in. This left hand, this elbow goes down. That breaks the balance on the movement in. As you drive forward and in, cinch it down, just like that. See that?
So you're turning a wrench, and that locks this whole side of his arm down. Steve used to tell me, just totally control this whole side of his body. He has no choice then but to go down. Lock that down.
Now when you do that, do you see how his head came in there, guys? That's an immediate action. So when you do that, head goes right on that chest, bang it with your head. Okay, and you scoot through and toss it. Bam, there you go. Okay, lock it in, steps in, there. Now you got that part. See the low? Now, let's turn around here. Everybody can see your head. Now watch, he's not going to throw. Watch what he does with his head on the inside of his shoulder. Listen to your arm, so you can see. See his head is driving into his body here? He doesn't duck under him. Do it like come under his arm or something. He doesn't do that. He probably could, but you'll get more power. Because my old coach, Renee Pomerell, said this was your third arm. Your head's your third arm. Okay? Use it to drive him with it. Okay? Let's take a look at it again. Let's go ahead and roll the full front throw. There you go. On the other side of the mat now, when he steps in, what we want to isolate here, guys, is when you're coming in, what this hand does. Okay? Now when he drops in, does the drop step, see how his head's driving in? Now look, this arm, in the standard way of doing Kuchiki Daoshi, the way the Kodokan does it, okay? The standard way it really works well. You're going to grab through here and grab the inside of his near thigh. See that? Everybody see that? His head is driving in, and he's going to take him over. Okay, wham. Bam. See how you're right in the side control. You've thrown him for a big score, you've body slammed him, and you've already taken him on the mat. See me doing standing, okay? And a lot of you old timers like me, learned what was called Kuchiki Daoshi in the next video, you're going to say, well, you know, that's Kuchiki Daoshi, what you're going to see coming up. It was a leg pickup, and you step inside like an Ouchigari, and you hook the leg, an inside leg reap, and throw him down on his back. It was great for a hard throw. It was a very hard throw. It is a very hard throw, and it was a great way to transition to the ground, especially in Sambo, where you could go immediately into a nice leg submission, and Jiu-Jitsu as well. And I first learned the Kuchiki Daoshi in this form that you're going to see here in this upcoming video when I was studying Jiu-Jitsu in the 1960s. And then later, you know, we also did it in Judo as well. But this form here is what was the original form, to me anyway, of Kuchiki Daoshi. So this next video is about, it is 2 minutes and 40 seconds. And so we're going to be explaining the style of Kuchiki Daoshi, where you pick the leg up and step inside. It looks like an Ouchigari type reaping motion. So you'll see what I'm talking about here. So here we go. The dead tree drop, Kuchiki Daoshi, which is kind of what a lot of you may remember seeing coming up for many years. This is one of the variations or applications of Kuchiki Daoshi that the Kodokan now recognizes. So, and again, this is my way of doing this particular one. You can see the big movement here. I've got standard kumikata grip, okay? Now basically what I want to do is, as I come in, I'm going to grab his leg, either grabbing by hooking it or grabbing his pant leg. So as I drop in, I grab his pant leg, or so say I'll scoop and I pick it up, and I pick it up to my hip, okay? And notice when I did that, I came in here, I dropped in, lowered my level with my right foot between his legs, and my right hand was here. My straight leg was right here like this, okay? So as I do this, as I drop in, lower my levels, and see how I'm driving, I'm not bending over, dropping low. Okay, as I do this, I grab the leg, and I just pick it up to my hip. As I do that, I bring this foot through. Bring it up, step, and it's hard not to throw him because here's my base leg now. My right leg, I will hook and throw him. So let's come on over here. When we come in, as I drop in, pick it up, step, throw him flat on his back. Okay, can I? There you go. Okay. Nick, you and Anthony want to get in? Try this? Go ahead. Come on in. There you go. Remember, don't bend over at the waist. Drop, lower your level with your hips.
Like those yoga masters, they don't have to eat or drink anything for 60 days at a time.
Okay, Nick, you want to get in and give it a try? There you go. It's a very fast shuttle step, very fast, quick step to pick him up and hit. There you go. That's it. See, again, this is another application of Kuchiki Daoshi, dead tree drop.
There you go. I don't know.
I might add, that form of Kuchiki Daoshi is really a hard throw. I remember as a kid studying this as a teenager, we had horsehair mats. The mats were actually filled with horsehair, and they were canvas-covered mats on a floor that was a cement floor. Okay, our dojo, when we did jiu-jitsu at the time, had those really old mats that you roll up. They were tufted, and they were just canvas covers, and they were laying on a cement floor in my coach's garage. He had like a 2-car garage, I believe, 1.5-car garage, and he converted that to his dojo. And boy, when we did Kuchiki Daoshi, these are the days before crash pads. Man, we were beating the snot out of each other. So nobody liked this throw, but it was a great throw for self-defense, for real world, even judo. And I remember the early days of my contest career actually using Kuchiki Daoshi in this form in judo tournaments and getting ippons for it. So it works. It's a great move. The last video we're going to look at is almost 3 minutes long, and it's a throw that is first called Sukui Nagi. to my knowledge, by many people, scooping, a variation of the scooping throw. But it came to be known, and it still might be called Sukuinagi by some people, but it's often called Te Guruma. Te means hand, Guruma means to wheel someone over. This is one form of Te Guruma that we're going to show here. We're going to teach it, and it's a very good form as a counter to Seoinage. I'm going to have the guys do this. I think Derek and Mike are doing this. And it's an excellent counter. Of course, you can't use it. I don't know the IGF rules. They might have allowed this again. I don't know, but I know it's been used extensively as a counter against any forward throw, like cross-body throws, Morote Gari, that type of thing. So Te Guruma was a great weapon, and still is a great weapon in competitive judo. Again, we permit it in AAU judo, freestyle judo rules, other contest rules in the IGF, I think, permit it. Certainly used still in Sambo. And but it's a competitive, but it's a great throw no matter what. So anyway, this is one form of the many forms of Te Guruma. So you're going to see it here slightly under 3 minutes. So here we go. He comes up with a stand-up, like a Seoinage attack. You want Seoinage? Is that still for?
Yeah, it's easy
okay.
enough now.
So if Mike comes in with a stand-up opponent Seoinage, Derek's going to hop around and he's going to counter with a Te Guruma. There we go. You want to coach it through?
Yep. As he comes in, it's still the same move. I'm going to block there and hop around front. Now here's where the difference comes. He's already moved his arm across, so he's dipped that shoulder, which is usually the hardest part of the Te Guruma. You've got to get past that arm. He's already done that for me by moving it over there. And now I'm in front of him on an angle, and I can see his thigh. If you can see his thigh, you can perform a Te Guruma. So I step in, and I scoop nice and high on his thigh. Some guys will grab all the way up in the crotch. You don't have to. Just don't grab down here. Okay, that's not going to help. Catch right up on the top part of the thigh, and then bring that other foot right through there. Lift up and push your hips up. And you pull down on the lapel and push that leg up as much as you can.
Really important thing. He said pull out. He's keeping that lapel the whole time through. Yeah. 10 different angles so we can get a yeah, show a different stand.
Okay, you can see my hand right there now.
Now there are two phases to that lift. When he scooped, he lifted up, okay? Then he just shifted a little bit and turned and he rolled him. That's the Te, hand, and then the wheel is the Guruma, that second part. It actually comes Te Guruma, okay? Some people have called us in the past, maybe still do, Sukuinagi, scooping throw, because you're scooping them up off the mat. If you call it that nomenclature, that's okay too. Generally, this is now called Te Guruma almost everywhere. And so that's what we're here to. Want to do two more times? Then we'll let you practice, okay? Boom.
Okay.
Lift and toss.
Now if you can't get the lift, we're going to drive them down and do the same motion. Okay. Boom. Right through here. I'm going to come through. Oh, I'm trying to lift him and it's not working. So I'm going to pull and lift the leg as much as I can as I push him that way. Might be ugly, but it's the way you get a bigger guy down with the Te Guruma.
Yeah, but who's on his back and who's on his side?
Exactly.
There you go. Okay. There are a lot of variations of this move too. We're just showing you one. There's some where you come in and you throw your hip in front of him, really toss him cleanly over the hip. Okay. Using his hip, you may like that one. If that works for you, do it. Any of these work, and there are a lot of other variations too. I mean, you do thigh lifts and all kinds of cool stuff, but that's pretty much the standard Te Guruma out of the counter to this. Did everybody see that? We good with it? Well, at least for today, that's what I have to say about leg grabs. Again, we only covered some of the many leg grabs that can be used in judo, jiu-jitsu, sambo, whatever it may be. But they're great techniques. They're viable. They're great for sport. They're great for self-defense. And again, like I said, I only covered some of them. So, but please, judo coaches, don't stop teaching leg grabs. You know, when you say leg grabs, maybe that doesn't give them the full credit for what they are. They're reaping movements, they're pickup movements. They're great ways of manipulating the lower bodies, your opponent's lower body with your hands and throwing him through the air onto the back with control and force. They're technically very sound, and they're very much part of judo. Just because they're not part of the current contest rules of judo and the IJF, please don't neglect them. It is very much part of the history, tradition, and technical innovation that makes judo what it is. So keep teaching them, coaches, please. Well, anyway, with that plea to keep teaching leg grabs, That's about all I've got to say for today. So thanks for tuning in, and I will see you next time.